let you know if somebody pulls up. All right, good morning.
Do you know that Haley and the gang are coming? I haven't talked to them. I'll tell them.
Good to see everybody here. Those of us that are still left. Yeah, we did not ascend into the mountains. Yeah, but it's good to be here. Do we have any prayer requests before we begin?
I've got one for, David Ray, got faith, well, we're not famous, but anyway, David Ray's sister, Betty Patrick, West Florida, is having a serious operation on the 29th.
Okay.
And she's 84. Very.
Yeah.
She's been here before.
Yeah. On the 29th? Okay. All right.
Older, they really hesitated to do the surgery. I had 3 doctors finally agreed to do it. But her stomach is pressed up against the lungs and breathing. They're gonna have to rearrange.
Maybe that's my problem. Maybe that's my problem.
Have they checked it out?
I don't. Pray for our sister-in-law Kayla, Robbie's wife. She's had some complications with her pregnancy, and we need to pray for her.
When did she do? She has 2 months left to go. She's home from the hospital and doing better, but let's
Yeah.
continue to pray for her.
Courtney has knee surgery Tuesday morning.
Oh, okay. Courtney.
Bless her heart.
Sports related?
It's for meniscus.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sister Carolyn, would you pray for us?
School this morning, Lord, as we, Brother Brian teaches us, Lord, and help us all to take part and learn something about you this morning, Lord, and help us to spread the gospel, Lord, wherever we get a chance, that we can tell others that there's a better way to live than to live in sin. We ask you to be in the ones that's on their way home now, Lord, from LJ. Just give them safe traveling, Lord, and get them home safely. And we ask you to be with anything that any work that may be going on there, Lord, in the future. We just ask you to if there's any there that, well, we know they are because they are everywhere, people that need you, Lord, and we ask you just to work things out as you see fit. We want you to will to be done in everything we do. We ask you, Lord, to help us to be a lighthouse in this community, that people will see that we do have this church here, Lord, and they're welcome, whoever they are. We ask you now to go with us, keep us humble and holy, and we'll give you the praise. Amen.
Yeah. All right.
That place is a little place, and seems like everything's tourist.
Yeah. Right. There's a lot of vacation homes up there. There's a lot of vacation homes and that kind of thing up there, but it is a tiny area. And Lord willing, something will come of it. That was a big effort that Brother Brad and different ones put forward to.
Look, he put his money where his mouth is, and really where his heart is, not his mouth. I talked to him Thursday, and I told him, I said, Brad, your Uncle Butch will die. And when he dies, you won't have to say, man, I wish I had acted on that prompt that God gave me.
Right.
You're the watchman on the wall, you're sounding the warning.
Right.
Whether or not he accepts anything, and I don't know where Butch is with God. He may already be sanctified. I don't
Right.
know.
We don't know.
But they didn't. They were in aggressive evangelism mode in the meetings. So it indicates maybe that he's not. I don't know. Maybe Peggy and Brad know.
Yeah.
But bottom line, and our folks collectively spent a minimum of $25,000 to be there this weekend. That blows my mind. As a group, when you add up the lodging, the gas, the food, and I'm being extremely conservative, I think we had at least 80 people there from out of town, based on what I could tell on the video. I don't know about the head count, but you conservatively do $400 a couple. If there was, if there was 50 couples there, that's 20 grand. I'm being very
I
conservative.
think you are too.
Well, they either that or they were sleeping in their car. I don't know which. I don't know all their details, but yeah, I'm sure they did. There were hotels available. There were hotels and houses, but bottom line,
Stayed together.
but it really said two things to me. One, there was a camp meeting bounce. Brian and I talked about that. What I call the bounce after camp meeting. Everybody's inspired. You could call a meeting in January, February, and you're not going to get the same turnout that you do in August.
Right.
But the other thing is, it does say that it's still on our folks' heart to evangelize, and I believe that proved it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We have said it for years that we want something to do. The young people have said it. The young marrieds have said it. The olders have said it. We're looking for something to do, looking for a work, and so this weekend definitely speaks to that. And they answered the call, and so that's the thing. You can say, Lord, I want a work to do, but when He gives you one, do you step up and answer that call? So that was very heartening to see so many that made that effort and made that trip, and the gospel was definitely preached. And there was a young lady that testified last night who I don't know that I've ever heard testify in a big meeting. I was proud of her. And so that speaks to personal growth. It speaks to, a lot of different things. And I was very encouraged that his home crowd supported him like it did. They just about shut down the whole Charleston church in order to make it over there. So there's a lot of things that we have, in looking at what happened this weekend, to be thankful for. Even if they had not had altar service, there's a lot of good that happened in those two meetings. So I'm very encouraged by that, and just encouraged in general, because you can always find fault. It don't take a rocket scientist to look around and find something wrong. If you go to a new place of employment, once the new wears off, you'll find something that you don't really like about it. Every place is like that. Every new job, every church, every family, every anything. When there's people involved, you can always find something wrong with it. The devil loves for us to find fault. And so God help us to ignore those things, address them if there's wrong that needs to be addressed, but to not dwell on those things, and let's find the positive, let's find the good, and let's work for improvement. There's always room for growth, always room for improvement. Well, we are in the 5th chapter of Ephesians this morning. Ephesians chapter 5. We've been tripping through the book of Ephesians, and this is one of my favorite books in the entire Bible. I love the book of Ephesians because I like it when I get the big picture and then it tells me why it means something to me. Okay? And so just like in school when they teach you about history, they teach you about world history, and you get about a brief drive-by of everything that ever happened in China and Rome and Egypt and everything. And then by the time you graduate, they get down to American history. And then they get down to government and economics and what that means for me. Well, the book of Ephesians is like this. In the first chapter, we get the big picture. What was God's plan of salvation? And then in the second, third, and fourth chapters, he starts to bring it on down to you and I. What does salvation mean? Second chapter is all about how to get sanctified. Third and fourth chapters about how to live sanctified. And the fifth and sixth are about how we can be successful, how we can flourish, how we can be happy and be strong and be overcomers. So you got to get sanctified before you can be an overcomer. You got to know the plan of salvation before you can get sanctified. You got to understand all these things in order. And so in the fifth chapter, he starts to really get down to the nitty-gritty on how you're going to be successful. And in the fifth chapter, he does a lot of talking about what not to do. So in order for you to understand what to do, you also got to know what not to do, right? That's what they tell you in school. First thing we used to do when school year would open, we'd get everybody together and we'd go over the rules, right? Kids just had school this week. That was the first thing they did, right? First day of school. Syllabus. What not to do. What to do. You got to know the rules so that you can be successful. So, in the fifth chapter, he begins here talking about what not to do. What things to avoid. What things to cling to in order to be pure and in order to be smart. Because some of these things are common sense. If you want to be successful in your spiritual life, some of this stuff is not rocket science. So let's begin here in the first part of the fifth chapter. Brother Gary, I'll let you start.
Be therefore followers of God as dear children, and walk in love, as Christ has also hath loved us, and has given himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling savor.
Okay, so how do we know we're going to be followers of God and we're going to be successful? He says, follow me. And he's not just saying, walk behind me. He's saying, imitate me. Copy what I've said. And we're not just being copy artists. We're not just imitating. We're doing everything to be like him, right? So when people have idols, when they have sports figures or musicians or whomever that they look up to, what do? They start dressing like them. They start talking like them. They start acting like them. You go look on social media, all these people trying to look and act and be successful, they're all trying to do the same thing. They're trying to take pictures with famous people. They're trying to make their pictures, make them look beautiful, and take picture next to a really nice car so you think they're rich. And they're imitating what they think is successful. And he says, be ye therefore followers of God as dear children. What do children do?
They follow.
They imitate.
They do imitate.
When you hear a child learn how to speak, what they're doing is they're imitating sounds they hear coming from you. And what do? Say dada. Right? And we mimic it to them so they will copy us.
Right.
Because we want them to say dada before mama. I was never successful with any of that.
Mama, spent more time.
She was a better trainer than I was. Well, but that's what children do. And really, when they talk about language development, the reason children learn languages easier, even foreign languages, is because they're better copiers than adults are. They don't mind making mistakes. They just copy everything they hear. They're little parrots, okay? He says, be followers like a child. Imitate me. Model yourself after Christ as dear children. And walk in love as Christ also loved us. So we have to imitate the love that he had for us. And the love that he had for us went so far that he gave himself for us. So it went to the ultimate end. Some people, they have love up to a certain point. They love you, but when the chips are down, they might not be there, right? Because they got other responsibilities, they got other things. All of us have, to a certain extent, some limitations on how much we love each other. Christ had no limitations. He loved us so much, he gave everything he had. Okay? So, now we're going to talk about things to avoid. Verse 3.
But fornication and uncleanness or covetousness, let it not be once named among you as becometh saints, neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor jesting, which are not convenient, but rather giving of thanks.
And one more.
For we know this, that no whoremonger, nor unclean person, nor covetous man, who is an idolater, hath any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God.
Whew. Now that's pretty strong.
Yeah.
And the world today would say, oh, don't judge. He might be going to heaven, you don't know. Well, if he's a fornicator, he's not going to heaven. Sex outside of marriage,
Right.
you're not going to heaven. You can't claim it. There's no way that this type of behavior can be named among the saints.
Right.
If we were to hear today that the Pope was a fornicator, the world will go nuts. Why? Because he set himself up to be the head of a Christian church. He's supposed to be the paragon of Christianity. Can't do it. And we're talking about any of us. If we're named saints, he said, let it not be once named among you as becoming saints. What does being a saint mean? Well, first you got to be sanctified. Remember Nora Beth used to say that? I'm so glad I'm sanctified. That's the way she would pronounce it. If you're going to be a saint, you got to be sanctified first. And then you got to live like a saint. Ooh. Now, we have twisted the word saint to sound like something that is completely unattainable. Saints are only folks who die. There ain't no saints living down here. That's the way the world would have us believe, is that saints are up in heaven. There's no saints down here because nobody's perfect. We're not talking about having no faults. We're not talking about that I was a little bit crabby this morning and I'm so sorry. We're not talking about that. We're talking about blatant, ungodly lifestyle. Fornication, uncleanness. There are some things. There was a Supreme Court case back in the 70s. They were suing about banning pornography in magazines in public places. And the question came up, how do you define that? And one of the Supreme Court justices says, I can't give you a definition, but I know it when I see it. Uncleanness, when we talk about the lifestyle of a saint, sometimes you can't put it down in a definition. But it's evident when you see it. It's dirty, it's filthy, and it ought not to be something that we put in our lives.
When the first two verses outweigh what he's fixing to admonish us about,
Yeah.
the following God as dear children and walking in love, when that's your focus, it's not, it's not hard to stay away from the rest of it.
One good definition when you wonder whether something is right to do or not, because sometimes we'll justify things
Sure.
because we want to do it.
Yes.
So one thing I found that helps, we all have spiritual heroes.
Right?
Somebody in the church that we really respect.
Right.
And it's a simple question. would brother so-and-so do this? How would I feel if that brother or sister that I look up to and respect, if I'm debating about whether I ought to do it or not, how would I feel if I heard that
They were doing it.
they did it?
Or how
That's a really simple test.
would I want them knowing I was doing it?
I remember back when Jimmy Swaggart was real big and all, you know, and who was it, that Pat, whatever that guy's name was, that got, had, Jim Baker.
Jim Baker, yeah.
Had that big, and him and his wife had that big telethon or
Right.
whatever. And when he fell and all, you know, and Johnny and I supported Jimmy Swaggart for what little bit we could. And I said, well, if he ever lets us down, I said, you know, that's going to be bad. Well, it wasn't very long after that where he did. And I said, you can't put your faith in man.
No, that's true.
He not only did, he did it twice, the same thing. And one of our folks recently from another town tried to defend him to me about the ministry he's got going on now. And I said, he ought to be ashamed to be in the pulpit. I'm not saying he's not saved. I'm not saying he's not going to
You're talking
heaven.
about Jim Baker.
I'm talking about Jimmy Swaggart.
Okay.
Jimmy Swaggart.
Yeah.
Because
I
the
think-
Bible calls
think it's
ministers are called to a higher standing of not
Yes.
failing in front of the public. It's God looks at us all the same.
Right.
A minister is no special thing to God other than he's given you a calling. But to violate that calling in such a public manner, not once but twice, you ought to be ashamed to be in the pulpit.
Yeah.
And this one of our folks was wanting to defend it, and I was about to come unglued like, no. The Bible, and y'all have heard me talk about it, talks about in Corinthians, that the ministry be not blamed. That's something I live with every day. I don't want the ministry to be blamed because of anything, and we ought to all feel that way
Absolutely.
because we all represent this church.
Well, how many people refuse to go to church because of hypocrisy? They say, well, there's hypocrites. It's always been a major issue, and that is what we mean by the ministry being blamed. When they see something being preached but not lived, the ministry gets blamed. They don't blame the individual, which is what ought to happen. It's the individual that's got the problem. The individual and their failings and shortcomings doesn't take away from the truth of the gospel. The gospel remains true regardless of who it is. But, so he says, fornication, uncleanness, covetousness. So this is just a state of greediness and selfishness, wanting something that don't belong to you, wanting something that is not yours. Don't let it be named. Filthiness, that goes along with uncleanness. Anything that is just not something that doesn't fit in a sanctified life. Foolish talking. Now that's a broad term. Foolish talking. And jesting. What is jesting? Joking. And he says joking that's not convenient. So he's saying that saints don't need to be joking? Can't laugh?
It's not,
We must always be a sourpuss.
it's not suitable, not appropriate.
Right. He's talking about coarse, vulgar humor that is not convenient. It's not useful. It's not something that gives you a good reputation as a sanctified person. And the same thing with foolish talking. You know, it's one thing for us to talk about things that are humorous, but it's another thing to have conversation that has no point, just running off at the mouth. And you know, some people, they don't care what they're talking about, they just like to talk. And it's half the time it's foolish. It's just, it has no purpose. He said you need to be thankful, giving of thanks. You need to be talking about things that are good, things that are uplifting. Then he says, this, you know, no whoremonger. This is connected to fornication.
That word is in the Bible 5 times.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't either. Well,
5 times.
5 times, all in the New Testament.
Interesting.
Yeah. But yet, I hear it often enough in casual conversation guess that, they'll say so-and-so's a whoremonger, or, whatever. The word's thrown around a lot, but it's only in the Bible.
But it's only in the Bible 5 times.
And it's all in the New Testament.
Well, and it indicates, so he's writing to the folks here in Ephesus. Ephesus was in Greece. And the culture of the day in Greece and Rome, sexual immorality was just rampant. They didn't care whether you were married or not. They didn't care whether you were male or female or not. They didn't care if it was, they didn't care. It was loose and wild, and it was acceptable. And so when these folks got sanctified and came in the church, some of them were still living like that because it was all they knew. And so Paul talks about this in Corinthians. Corinth was over in Greece as well. He talks about it to the Ephesus folks in Greece, to the Philippians. He talks about it to the Galatians. He talks about it over and over again. He talks about it to the Romans, because they all had some issue with it because it was the culture of society around them. Well, we ain't much different. We're not much different in our society. It is surrounding us. It's always in our face. It's in our children's faces, showing us that not wearing any clothes is okay. You're the one with a problem if I want to dress like this.
When he's talking to the Romans, that first chapter that's so
Yeah.
good, he says that they did not like to retain God in their knowledge.
Right.
So being willingly ignorant or just not,
Yeah.
they don't want to retain God in their knowledge. Just don't talk about it.
Well, all of it, that type of behavior all goes back to the love of yourself and seeking temporary pleasure. And Satan will have you, you described it a long time ago as a whirlpool in the ocean. And boats that get caught in a whirlpool oftentimes don't even know that they're in it until it's too late. Because on the very outward edges of the whirlpool, at the top, you barely feel the current.
Right.
And then, what is it doing? It's like a tornado. It's spiraling downward until it sucks you in, right? And there's no hope at that point. Well, sin is the same way. People leave God, and they're not really doing a whole lot. They just, just kind of doing I'm just not going to church. I'm just doing my own thing. I'm just not praying and reading I don't have to pray and read my Bible no more. I got more time for me. But then, little by little, things creep in, and circumstances of life begin to take control, and it oftentimes means that the situation has control over you rather than you having control over the situation.
Right.
How many people find themselves in circumstances that they feel like they can't get out of because they've made decisions that got them here, right? But now the situation has control.
Yes.
We had a young man that got sanctified a couple years ago. And one of the issues that he had when he was at the altar was he didn't know how he was going to survive when he got home. He had got caught up in some stuff before he came to camp meeting. And stepping away from it was not an option. He was going to be in big trouble. He was going to have folks after him. And he was scared, and rightly so. And he got home, and the Lord had been working all during the week of camp meeting, and all those things he was worried about were gone. He didn't have to talk to those people anymore. Now, you talk about the power of God. It gives me chill bumps just telling you. The situation had gotten to where he couldn't control it anymore. But yet when he gave it over to the Lord was working and he didn't even know behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Praise God for that.
Yeah.
So, he says, no whoremonger. That's someone who is so invested in that type of lifestyle that everything about their life has to do with it. I've known some people like that. That's all they could talk about. That's all they could think about. It's a terrible way to live. Unclean person. Now he said unclean 3 times now. Filthiness, uncleanness, and an unclean person.
He's not talking about that your carpet needs vacuum
Or you didn't shower in 3 days.
or your car.
Right. He's not talking about that. We're talking about a life of filthiness. Just name your poison. A covetous man, he's mentioned that 3 times now, twice now. An idolater, a covetous man who is an idolater. So an idolater is what? Cohen, what's an idolater? If you serve idols, what is it talking about?
Something you put before God.
Right. Okay. So, yeah, you worship it. Right. It's an awful name, but they put it as the name of a TV show. American Idol. And what are they doing? These people are getting up and they're trying to push them as the next person that the whole world can look up to. That's the whole premise of the show. Because what happens to all these celebrities? I've been reading about that girl, what's her name, Mabry? That's been doing all them concerts lately. Taylor Swift. Sorry, it was gone right out of my head. The amount, you can go read some articles about it, the amount of fanaticism that people, the lengths that people have gone to worship this child. Well, she is a child. It's unholy. It's idolatry. I don't even want to get into all that stuff. That's a rabbit trail. But you wouldn't believe the lengths that people have gone to in order to emulate, or emulate means to make myself like her, to follow after her, to just be in her presence. She's what I want to be. That's idolatry. And he says covetousness is idolatry. Because when you want something so bad that you're willing to go to great lengths in order to get it, what you've done is you've made an idol out of those things. You are worshiping, really, it's more about the chase than it is about obtaining what it is. You ever known people like that? Especially when it comes to relationships, they cared more about the chase than they did about the relationship. Well, covetousness is like that. When I have a covetous spirit, it's more about me going to get it than it is about the thing. Because it doesn't satisfy. The search is what addicts me, right? And he says that's idolatry because you're caring about that more than God. None of these have an inheritance in the kingdom of God. Okay, verse 6. Where's the microphone? Go ahead, sister.
Let no man deceive you with vain words, for because of these things concern the wrath of God upon the children of disobedience. But not ye, be ye not therefore partakers with them.
Right. So he says, don't let anybody deceive you. And there are people who will deceive us to say that these things are okay. It's okay to want all these things. You get on social media and they'll tell you, let me tell you how to go get it. It's okay to want to better your life. Those are vain words. They're deceitful. Okay? And he says, because of these things, the wrath of God is going to come on the children of disobedience. So, don't be partakers. Don't follow after that. All right? Verse 8.
For ye were sometimes darkness, but now are ye light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. For the fruit of the Spirit is in all goodness and righteousness and truth, proving what is acceptable unto the Lord. And have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. For it is a shame even to speak of those things which are done of them in secret. But all things that are reproved and are made manifest by the light, for whatsoever doth make manifest is light. Wherefore he saith, Awake, thou that sleepest, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give thee light.
All right. So, he says, you used to be like them. Right? Verse 8. You were sometimes darkness. You used to be over there. You used to be just like them. Don't get a big head now that you're sanctified, because you used to be like that. He says, but now you are light. You used to be darkness, but now you're light. So, if you're light, you need to walk as children of the light. You need to do what you're saying you're doing. Live like you say you live. For the fruit of the Spirit is in all goodness and righteousness and truth. If you want to find the fruit of the Spirit, go look for things that are goodness, righteous, and truth, and you'll find the fruit of the Spirit. Someone read, I think it was Patrick, about the works of the flesh, which are manifest, which are these. And he lists a whole bunch of them. And then it turns right around and says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness. There's a reason why it says the fruit of the Spirit and the works of the flesh. When you're living in sin, there are things that you do that are works. They're actions. They're choices. They're works of the flesh. You don't just wake up a fornicator. You don't wake up someone who has terrible language. You have to go do something in order to get that label, right? If I'm going to be covetous, I don't just wake up covetous. I've got to put action behind it. They're works of the flesh. And it is work. If you look at the lives of people who live caught up in all of that, they're like hamsters on a wheel. They're just constantly going after, doing after, spending all their time, energy, money, and everything they have in order to get something. It's a work. The fruit of the Spirit, though, happens naturally through growth. You don't have to work for love. You get it from the altar, and what do we sing? It makes me love everybody. I'm so glad I'm sanctified. Because when you get the Holy Spirit, that love comes with it. You just feel that love. You don't have to work for it. You get up feeling that way. Brother Bobby said when he got up from the altar, the second person he hugged was the person he had the biggest grievance against that caused him to leave God in the first place. And he said, I hugged him and I didn't think twice about it. Because he had love in his heart.
It was 18 works of the flesh and 9 fruits of the Spirit, which proved serving God is twice as good as not.
That's good.
Well, the fruit is abide in the vine,
Right.
and I in you.
Yeah.
You abide in me, and I in you. For without me, you can do nothing.
Right.
It's abiding in Him that brings forth much fruit.
Right.
The fruit of the Spirit.
And those things are not fruits of the flesh.
No, they're not.
Right? Because you can talk about love and sing about love all you want to when you're not sanctified. But true godly love, not romantic love.
Right.
I'm talking about true godly love only comes through the Spirit of God.
Yeah.
It's a completely different kind of love than what the world sings about. The joy, the peace. The world definitely, the flesh is not going to allow you to be long-suffering. Right? You don't have the patience. You lose your temper. You cut people off because you ain't gonna suffer long when you're in sin and you don't like somebody. But when I got the Spirit of God, and I love you, and I'm at peace, you can rant and rail and be all kinds of jerk, and I'm going to love you. I'm going to long suffer you because I got the Spirit of God.
That testimony that you mentioned, she talked about her brother-in-law. She said, I love my brother-in-law. He's my brother-in-law. I'm supposed to love him. She said, but when he prayed over me at the altar, she said, the love I have for him now, it's nothing like what I had before.
Yeah.
And you're not talking about a romantic love. You're
No.
talking about a godly,
Right.
how much she loved hearing him pray over her.
Yeah. That was really,
It really was.
really poignant. So the fruit, a peach tree doesn't have to work to produce peaches. It's in its nature,
Right.
right? So the fruit just comes when there's watering and fertilizer and rain and all this stuff. It just naturally shows up. And the same is true when we're in the Spirit.
And those things come from God.
They do.
What nurtures you comes from God.
That's right. Right. And so he says, have no fellowship with the unfruitful works.
Right.
The works of darkness have no fruit.
What
Now,
fruit had you been in those things where you're now?
you don't have fruit.
No fruit.
There's no fruit, right? So notice that he says, have no fellowship with the works. Now, I've heard folks quote this verse and talk about it as if that guy is a real vile, cruddy sinner. I'm not going to have any fellowship with him because we're not supposed to have fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness. It says, have no fellowship with the works. Now, sometimes that does mean to separate yourself from folks that are living like that.
You can't have works without people.
This is true. But what I'm saying is that I can't go affect them either if I don't go talk to them.
Well, it doesn't say don't talk to them,
I'm-
it's don't fellowship.
That's correct. Yes. Yes.
Don't get me started.
I know.
Don't take part in the works.
Don't take part in the works.
The difference is me having a casual relationship with somebody and having fellowship.
And having fellowship. That is correct.
And that's what draws people away from God when they develop. We warn our young people about this, we've done it for decades. Be careful of the kind of friendships you develop outside of church. It's one thing to have a casual relationship with somebody. It's another thing to have fellowship with somebody.
Right.
The people that you have fellowship with can draw you away.
Absolutely. Well, it's why.
That verse is not out of context. I'm not supposed to have fellowship with people that are living in darkness.
Right. That is true.
And some of them are living in darkness and claiming to be sanctified.
And the Bible says for us to discern the spirits, to understand.
Other verses, I'm not going to quote about that.
Yeah, we're not going to go down that rabbit trail. So he said, it is a shame to speak of those things which are done of them in secret. And what he's saying is, he's not saying we ain't supposed to call it out, but for us to dwell on it and for us to get into the nitty-gritty of what all they're doing. And he said, we don't even need to be talking about all that. And it really is a shame that those things are done by these people. And he says, but all things that are reproved are made manifest. Folks think they can hide their sin, and maybe you can hide it up to a point, but it's not hidden from God. It's not hidden from God. All right, so he says, wherefore he saith, awake thou that sleepest, and rise from the dead, and Christ shall give thee light. And he's talking about being asleep to the things of God. And a lot of people live like that. They just, when everybody sleeps a little different. Some folks, they're light sleepers, right? I can sneeze wrong and Mindy will jump up out of bed. And then some folks, it don't matter if a bomb goes off, they're not going to get up. And some folks go through life like that. They are just living in sin and oblivious, and you could be preaching right to their face, and who knows what's going on inside. They're just asleep. And he says, awake and rise from the dead, and Christ shall give thee light. Okay, 15, Di?
See then that ye walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. Wherefore be ye not unwise, but understanding what the will of the Lord is. And be not drunk with wine, wherein is excess, but be filled with the Spirit, speaking to yourselves in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord, giving thanks always for all things unto God and the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, submitting yourselves one to another in the fear of God.
All right, stop right there. So he says, see that you walk circumspectly. That's a big old $5 word. Use that in your essay next week, maybe. Circumspectly. It means to be conscious, to be aware. Walk aware. Walk.
Proverbs says, ponder the path of your feet.
Okay, so that's where I was going. That's where I was going at. Walk with intent.
Yeah,
Does it say let your faults be established?
well, I don't know.
Yeah. So.
I wondered what I knew. I'm sorry.
So if you ever go out on a walk, sometimes you just walking aimlessly. You don't really have a destination, you're just walking. And then sometimes you're walking from point A to point B.
It does.
Right.
And this is
Okay.
the path of your feet, and let all your ways be established.
Yes.
Meaning that your paths are they're done with
Intent.
planning. and
Yes.
thought, and all your ways are established. You
Right.
didn't just happen to go a certain direction.
Right. Cohen, when you were 3 years old, what did I used to tell you when you would go to do something? What would I tell you to do? Is this a good idea? Because he had an issue of impulses, you know? Had, yes, he has grown considerably.
Yes, he has.
He has. And so we would tell him, because we weren't always around when some of those things happened. And we would say, think before you act. Think about, is this a good idea? Am I going to get hurt? Are dad and mom going to be upset with me if I do this? And there were sometimes, where he would say, I thought to do this, but then I said, I don't think this is a good idea. And he was so proud of himself
Yeah.
at 3, 4, 5 years old.
In kindergarten, they call it impulsive puppies.
Impulsive puppies, yeah, that's not inaccurate. Well, we've got to walk like that in our spiritual life. God doesn't just want us wandering aimlessly. You know, you never know where you're going to end up. If you have no purpose in your walk, then you're going to end up in some bad places. So he says, be conscious of what you're doing. Think about what you're doing. Is this right? Is this something that the Lord wants me to do? He says, be follower. It's easier to follow somebody, right, than it is to find the place yourself. Okay? I don't like getting lost. I love GPS. It's wonderful. When we used to have paper maps, I hated them because I had to figure out where I was going. I couldn't always trust that I was going the right way. And I used to really appreciate it if somebody said, just follow me. Just follow me. I didn't have to think about it. I can just follow him. Well, he says, be followers of God as dear children and think about what you're doing.
Right.
Well, if I'm doing that, I'm going to avoid a lot of the bad that I would have got into otherwise. Okay? So,
Not unto your own understanding.
yes, that's right. He will direct thy paths, right? So he says, redeeming the time. Now, this is not just saying, there's a difference between time and time. There's a difference between every hour, every minute, that's just time. But he says, redeeming the time. That means what we have right now. This is the time. Redeem the time. In other words, pay attention to what you have right now and make it count. Make it count, because the days are evil. We've got to really be conscious of this time that we have right now. And so he says, don't be unwise, don't be foolish. Understand what the will of the Lord is. What is the will of the Lord? This is the will of God, even your sanctification. And so he said, now it seems random that he goes from talking about this to flipping to be not drunk with wine. What he's talking about is the lack of control that being drunk does bring in a person's life. And they had a big problem with this in the Ephesians church. It was part of that party atmosphere that we were talking about earlier, all those whoremongers and all that kind of stuff. He says, be filled with the Spirit instead. Right? And then I've really feasted on this verse in the last year. He says, speaking to yourselves in psalms, in hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord. Now, all the singing in the world is great. Y'all know I love to sing. I wake up with songs on my mind. But the first part of this verse says, speaking to yourselves in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. I don't always have a radio, my phone, something to let me listen to songs and sing along with it, right? Don't always have that. I don't always have my Bible with me in every circumstance, every moment of the day, that I can go read a verse. But I have what's up here. And he says, speak to yourself in psalms. Well, you can't speak to yourself in Psalms if you've never read the Psalms